So I want to ask now, I think we still will wait a few minutes, right? Because we have some more colleagues registered that they think an exchange of feelings, idea, comments. Welcome everyone. I'll say Boker Tov, Erev Tov, all the different places where we are. Welcome you. We welcome you, Bruchim Abayim. The decision, together with Harriet Hartman, to bring together to you both the Contemporary Jewry Journal and the Association for Social Scientific Study of Jewry, was based mainly about our belief that time has come to approach what we never thought it will reach this magnitude, and we defined several months ago as a change of epoch, right? And we said when, despite all the variety and inner values, when it comes to an end, an epoch, certain basic beliefs and attitudes are no longer shared. And we called you to amass our efforts to understand the present and study the possible scenarios of the future. I never thought then, only a few months ago, of these extreme, unexpected, and undesired times. Today, the existential and the cognitive realms intertwine, and it is our métier and our duty to commit to analyzing, explaining, and understanding our challenging reality, the nature, magnitude, and scope of the current events and their underlying processes make it difficult. Notwithstanding this complexity, we decided to organize these two roundtables that will try to approach the tragic event of October 7 and its subsequent developments that are still taking place in Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, and among the Jewish people. We experience the difficulty of conceptually framing today's reality, and that requires and demands to reconsider dimensions such as territory, contexts that are deterritorialized, civil society and communities in their convergences and divergences, state and government, structural trends and conjunctures, principles, goals, motives, and interests that are displayed in different dimension scales, the national, the regional, the global. The ongoing war has been defined as an hybrid one, taking place on the battlefield where life and death are markers, Israel, Gaza, as well as in the media and the academia, theories, ideologies, overlapping representation and prejudices, I would say the avatars of the negative tropos and representation of the Jew. Thus, today we are also exploring the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Hybridity, to our understanding, carries different weight, and costs. It are not the same. The issue of the relationship between Israel and diaspora reemerges with full force. What are the boundaries, the mutual responsibilities, the cohesions, the tensions, and repercussions of this relationship? As anti-Israeli demonstration and anti-Jewish prejudice are displayed, these questions acquire a new meaning, a new relevance. The fact that they take place in the spaces of reason, knowledge, and sciences, the universities, the academia, raises profound questions. Also, history and memory are with us. As many colleagues in the context of this critical reality that places the life of our people in danger, violence and cruelty All these surround us, opening a deep wound in the memory of past traumas. Today, we have with us 4 very distinguished colleagues, all of them members of the association. Ephraim Tabory is with us from Bar-Ilan University. Sociology and anthropology are his main wide fields, and a diversified spectrum of thematic research and very important contributions: social psychology, religious denomination, sociology of religion, conflict management, and sociology of immigration and immigrant integration. It is also with us Samuel Heilman, Emeritus Professor of the Harold Poshansky Chair in Jewish Studies and Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Queens College, the City University of New York. Samuel has focused and focuses on social ethnography of contemporary Jewish Orthodox movement, to which he has made remarkable and awarded contributions. Sergio DellaPergola is also today with us, Emeritus Professor of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is well known and world known as the demographer of the Jewish people. Let me add, the social and political demographer of the Jewish people. He has been guest professor of more than 100 universities, and his contributions are outstanding, not only to know how many we are, but also who we are. Harriet Hartman, my dear colleague Harriet, Emerita Professor of Sociology at Rowan University. She also has covered wide spectrum of interest in general and specific Jewish studies. Gender and family, and her research on it had empirical and conceptual work very relevant and focuses in the United States and Israel. He heads with great success our journal, right? The Contemporary Jewry. Well, I will introduce myself. I am Distinguished Professor of Political and Sociology at the UNAM, a position recently awarded that seriously compete with my Distinguished Visiting Professor at the Hebrew University. My focus is Latin America Jewry in global context. So having presented our colleagues, we'll start as we order in the invitation with Ephraim Tabory. I think it's very important the way he will approach that Israel and diaspora are not homogeneous entities and communities. So he will focus on analyzing how crossing of frontiers and overlapping of processes among the Israeli religious community impact today. And this is based on his research that will approach the dramatic current manifestation. So we'll start with you, Ephraim, and let us know if you need to. Okay. So here we go.
So thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Wherever we are all together, which is one of the motives of Israeli society tonight or today, that we are all together. Right after the war began, Bank Bar-Ilan, one of the banks in Israel, started distributing magnets that said, "Anachnu nenatzeach," we will win. And this became very popular. But it took just a matter of days until the slogan changed. And when we see the next slide will show that it now says, "Yachad nenatzeach," together we will win. The first slide said we will win, and now it's together we will win. This is a slogan that you now see all over the country. You see it on billboards, you see it in advertisements, radio and television advertisements. Almost all of them end with Yachad nenatzeach, together we will win. And let's now turn to the next slide. The next slide, Anachnu nenatzeach. This is an example of the type of things that's happening right now. In another 35 minutes, there will be a Knesset, a government meeting, talking about bringing them home, in which during the time that we have this webinar, the government will be deciding about the fate of the hostages. Let's go to the next slide, please. The slogan of "Together we will win" reminded me of a billboard that appeared years ago before Independence Day in Israel. There was a billboard that said "Together with pride, together with hope, in hope." And because of the modern technology at the time, the pictures on this billboard changed. So here you see a picture of an Ethiopian child and perhaps an native Israeli child. You would also see a picture of a boy and a girl. What you would not see is a religious boy and a girl. You would not see a Jew and an Arab. There were limits to "Together with pride" and "Together in hope." And this relates to what I want to claim in the next slide, is that when we see names like Free Democratic Republic of, we know it's not free. We know it's not democratic. It's something else completely. And the fact that Israel now is advertising is marketing itself. We are marketing ourselves as "Together we will win." It's because we are really not together in many ways, and we have not been together before the war. As I'm sure you all know, the descent and conflict of Israeli society. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next slide, not the one before. Okay, so we have United Jerusalem, which is really far from united, as this cartoon picture shows. And we go to the next slide. Elizabeth, thank you. In 2015, President Reuven Rivlin made a speech talking about the 4 tribes of Israel. He claimed that there are 4 distinct groups. One group is the secular, religious Zionists, the ultra-Orthodox, and the Arab. And he said that this is a problem for Israeli society and that we need to form a form of common Israeliness. Elizabeth, thank you. One of the groups that I'm focusing on today, the group that I am focusing on today, are the Haredim in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox actually constitute an entity, a united group. Even if they do not know one another, they are a group. I'll just tell you, this picture is a picture of the entrance to Jerusalem, when Haredim are standing trying to get a ride toward the Tel Aviv area, and they know for sure that someone will stop for them. And the reason is that because people always stop for my brother. But you'll never see now, in recent years, secular people standing there, because secular are a amalgamation of individuals. Elizabeth? The main issue right now, before the war, was the basic law and the recruitment law, basic law of Torah study and the recruitment law, that was to be brought before the Knesset right in the first week after Sukkot, after the holiday. And of course, now everything has been put aside. But this was perhaps the most significant issue facing the government, besides, of course, the reform in the law, in the basic laws of Israel. But the fact that the recruitment of Haredim was an amazingly important issue, and it still is an important issue. Elizabeth? In the past, the secular have been extremely upset about exemption of Israelis, of Haredim, and they have seen the secular population in general as extorting the secular population in many ways, also in education, in money for education, in money for yeshiva students, and especially for the army. Elizabeth? This is the type of thing that you could see before. Enlistment before appeasement. Elizabeth? Alone in the tank, one of my favorite ones. Alone in the tank, together in the bank. That the secular and the religious Zionists were serving in tanks, were serving in the army, and the Haredim were not there. The ultra-Orthodox were not there. but they were together in the bank because they were taking their money. Elizabeth? The ultra-Orthodox came up with a poster years ago about conversion. And they claimed that one people, one conversion, am echad, giyur echad, one people, one conversion. As soon as I saw this, I realized that they made a mistake. And the reason that they made a mistake is if you take a look carefully at the sign, am echad, giyur echad, look at the word giyur. That is the third word from the right. You have am echad hyphen giyur. Look at the word giyur. And now let's look at the next slide. Am echad giyus echad. All you had to do was to close the resh of the giyur, of the conversion, and it became one recruitment, one people, one recruitment. And this was put up immediately after the initial billboards calling for a common conversion. Elizabeth? I've done focus groups on religious and non-religious population in Israel. And these groups were done separately, groups of religious Jews, group of non-religious Jews. What we wanted to do was to see how people frame the issues. And we let them talk, and then we recorded, then we analyzed. We did lots of groups. I'm not going to go into the methodology, but I'm just going to give you an example of each of the groups, of the way that they see the others. The summary of word that I would use of the way that the non-religious, the secular, view the ultra-Orthodox, I really emphasize, not the national religious, is that they are parasites. This was a view that was shared also by the secular, but also in the national religious groups that we conducted. On the other hand, the way that the ultra-Orthodox view the non-religious is that they are Hebrew. This is really extreme and really one of the extreme examples. But to summarize, that they are Hebrew-speaking Goyim, Hebrew-speaking non-Jews. So, Elizabeth? The orientation of religious toward the non-religious is changing and has been changing. In the past, the way that I would analyze the orientation of the non-religious toward the religious population is based on conflict theory. Let's go to the next, Elizabeth, so that we can see that. No, okay. No, let's go back one then. No, back. You're going the wrong direction. Okay, we can do this also. The orientation of the non-religious toward the religious was based upon, keep going. Yeah, okay. The orientation of the non-religious toward the religious was based on conflict, a materialistic conflict theory. The idea was that the non-religious accepted the identity of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel. Nobody thought of ever saying to an ultra-Orthodox person, change your clothes. I don't like the way you dress. Things that we see in other countries, in France. We didn't see this in Israel. Anybody making fun of anybody chastising anybody. They totally accepted the ultra-Orthodox identity. What they didn't accept was the exploitation of money, of using the money, of not working, of not paying taxes, but of receiving large allotments, allocations for yeshiva study. That is what bothered them. So analytically, we would say that the orientation was based on materialistic conflict. The orientation of the ultra-Orthodox toward the non-religious, on the other hand, was based on identity theory. They negated the identity of the non-religious. They still negate the identity. Many of them still negate the identity of the non-religious. They don't accept it as legitimate. So the idea, and this orientation of the non-religious toward the religious, of saying that what bothered me in the past was your exploitation, your extortion, your using our money is changing. The feeling now is that they are taking our country away from us, that they are making too many changes and just changing the whole identity of Israel. And when you speak with young Israelis, among the reasons that they're thinking of leaving the country, you'll find that one of the reasons is because of the identity of the country. Let's go to the next one, please. I want to discuss about Haredim and the war, what's happened, because this is one of the issues that's leading to some change in Israeli society. First, as we know, there are some Haredim who, after the war started, came and wanted to enlist in the army. Now, there has been enlistment in the past. About 10 to 11% of Haredim joined the army, enlist in the army in the past, over the years. The number of Haredim who are military age now is 18%, and it's doubling every 18 years, I believe. And only 10 to 11% of them are enlisting now. As a result of the war, when the war started, there were people who went and said that they want to join the army. Some of them are just serving really as religious models, because when you're 38 or 40 years old and you join the army, you serve for a few weeks, get a uniform, and you do nothing. So the question here is really not about this type of age people, but whether younger people will enlist. I'll give you an example of a change is that when my own grandson was walking through Bnei Brak on Shabbat with his gun, he had off for the weekend and he was coming to visit me. The young kids ran around him and asked him what he's doing in the army, and they said that they want to enlist also when they grow up. This was after the war started, of course. So there are some Haredim who are enlisting. It is a small number. We don't know exactly how many are enlisting. It's a question mark. There are volunteer activities by Haredi men. They're setting up food stands, bringing food, setting up grills, giving out tefillin and tzitziot, amazingly enough, at least according to some of the religious press. Soldiers are asking for tefillin. Soldiers are asking for prayer fringes. Perhaps it's as an amulet. Who knows why? But it's brought in the paper as a change. Even the volunteer activities by women. We are such a small country that people can go near the border and take the laundry of soldiers, take their phone numbers, go home and do the laundry, and when they come back and call up the soldiers and tell them that their laundry is ready. There's also some virtual work on computers that's being done by women who are knowledgeable and can help the activities of propaganda, of telling people what's going on. The question that we have, Elizabeth, I hope that we have another one here. The implications for the future. This is really the question about Israeli society. I said that the religious, non-religious issue, the Haredi non-religious issue, is one of the most volatile issues. One of the laws that the government still wants to pass is the law about Torah study and the enlistment law. The Haredi community, some of the people in the Haredi government, some of the Haredim in the current government, are still trying to pass this law. And we'll see how this works out for the future, because if there's anything that bothered Israelis before about Haredi not serving in the army, it has been intensified by this war, where you have so many soldiers, national religious soldiers and secular soldiers, but very few Haredi soldiers. And the idea that Haredim can just stay home and study to protect the country, that is what some of them claim, that by learning they are actually protecting the country. That is a source of great tension between the societies. It also has an implication what's happening for the Haredi society, because if Haredim do serve in the army, for sure they will be influenced, or one can suspect that they will be influenced by being in a military environment as far as their religious education goes. This is one of the reasons why the heads of yeshivot do not want Haredim to serve in the army, because they lose their social control over them and the way that they can develop as Haredi Jews. For Haredi relations with national, religious, and secular, there's also the question of the implication of what will be. Can we say what will be? No, we really don't know what will happen. We actually don't even know what's happening now, because the Haredi newspapers, religious newspapers, are presenting a picture of what's happening. We can know for sure that it may be accurate, but only that it may be accurate. We really don't know how many people are involved and what the relations are. But the question for Israeli society is, with regard, one of the major questions for Israeli society, let alone the government, is whether the religious, non-religious issue will exacerbate. The reason why I'm a little pessimistic is because of the March on Washington that was held recently. One of the Haredi community was asked to participate in the march. And at first they agreed, but later on they rescinded. Some of them rescinded. And I want to close by reading an explanation by Rabbi Aaron Feldman, who is the Rosh Yeshiva of Near Israel in the United States, and he's a member of the Council of Torah Sages. And he says, he explains why he told his students, he told these students that they were not allowed to participate. It became clear, and I quote from the program, it became clear from the program that the rally was going to be a celebration of secular Zionism. Secular Zionism is a rejection of the Jewish faith. It supplants God and Torah as the basis of the Jewish people, for which it substitutes a common land and language. There can be no greater evidence of this than the anthem Hatikva, which states that the hope for Jews for 2 millennia has been to be a free nation in our land, not a nation of God and Torah. This anthem was scheduled to begin the program, and for that reason, the Haredi community could not participate, or some people in the Haredi could not participate in the March of Washington. So I close by saying that what I've tried to do is to talk about one of the issues that I think is a major one for Israeli society, assuming that we get through the war successfully, and that's a question as well, but assuming that we do get through and that people can move back to the north and people can move back to the south, the question is how the Haredi community will move and live in Israeli society and the relations. Thank you very much for your attention and listening.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Let me come back to the full screen. So, can you close, Eli, the screen? Okay, meanwhile, Eli, can you close, please, the screen?
Judith, we see you.
Ok. ¿Cómo regreso a la completa? Quedó totalmente pegada.
Ese es un problema.
Ok.
Sí, pero si quiere continúe y ahorita le ayudo.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Ephraim, really. Very interesting, your intervention, very. And your questions, well, are open. We'll share the conversation. Now let me welcome Sergio DellaPergola, who will focus as we previously agree on the impact of October 7th and the current situation in Israel on Israeli society and government, as well as on the world reaction to the war by non-Jewish and Jewish academia, this in the framework of Israel diaspora relations. Thank you. Please, Sergio.
Thank you, Judith. Hi, all. I see many faces, friendly faces. Many of you, not the majority quite, but many of you are Israelis or living in Israel. And so some of the things I'm going to say are quite obvious to the residents and probably also to some of the non-residents. But however, I will bring this conversation somewhat more into the emotional and personal. First of all, of course, I'm going to say a few words about Israel-diaspora relations, continuing a little about upon what Ephraim said. But the first thing I have to say is quite obvious. There is a huge existential gap between those of us who have children and grandchildren up the front in the north, in the south, and those who don't. And probably most of those who live in Israel have that experience. And so the level of apprehension and emotional involvement, after all, cannot be the same. And I speak personally, but it's clear that everybody can understand. I mean, this is much beyond the analytic and the cognitive. This is just the affective. And it is also difficult to transmit them. It means how many hours you sleep a night and how many hours you devote to watching the news through the different media that exist now today with the cellular. It's, of course, a new dimension. There are also uncounted chats with which each of us is involved, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of messages that arrive and that you refer to or not. So it's really being in a sort of cloud of emotions and passions. And that's what it is. But I'm now going to first of all I would like to first of all quickly review some of the obvious and then reflect a little bit on 3 or 4 more crucial points. The obvious is first of all the change of paradigm in terms of judging history and violence and war. That is what happened on October 7 is unprecedented in the history of the state of Israel. Everybody says since the Shoah we didn't see such a thing, but there are things that are innovative and that did not happen in the Shoah. So it is one step forward. Of course, I'm not describing this, but there are certain details that we come across that even the Germans did not do. And as far as I know, even from accounts of my own family, the Germans in the evening sometimes had to get drunk because they were tired, depressed, and shameful of what they had done during the day. And the guys that we saw on October 7 were chanting and showing and displaying and euphoric and very happy, and everybody was applauding them. So this is, again, one little step forward on the hierarchy of horror. And of course, historiography will have also to think of that, and sociology. Unfortunately, I don't see that very much reflected in public discourse. On this, I will continue in a moment. In between, I have to note, again, the obvious astonishment facing the ineptitude and incompetence of the intelligence, of the military, and of the political, which is beyond the recognition and beyond imagination. We still have to understand exactly what happened. Some of this is known, and some of this is known and deplorable, because it should not happen, and it could have been avoided, and it was not. And so here I will go straight forward to the point. At the top of everything stands the political responsibility, and the guy who said, you don't give a second ship to the captain of the Titanic. This same guy is now in command. And so the law applies to him. You don't give him a second chance with the Titanic. So after astonishment, then we go to the situation that preceded October 7, and that was the tragic cleavage in Israeli society, which had been determined by the same captain of the Titanic, but which, however, in my view, shows that society was healthy. And in ex post facto, we can say that the reaction of the public, the young public, those who were enrolled in the Miluim on October 7 is dramatically positive. And it shows that protest was a show of civic conscience, and it has been now shown by the participation of our younger generation in the battles and in the effort, and also among the civilians. The civilian activities of volunteers are amazing. And so civil society had shown it was healthy. Unfortunately, there were those who interpreted the situation differently, and they thought this is the right moment to kill Israel because it's weak and divided. It was not. And so this is really the good news. Of course, reaction of the government again is, I'm not speaking of the past, but I'm speaking of the present, is incredibly ineffective, inefficient, and inappropriate. This is amazing how incompetent could be the Israeli government in treating with the problems emerging after October 7. And again, if there were not the volunteers, there would be a tragic situation. Let's not forget we have those killed and those wounded and those mentally scared. We have 160,000 displaced persons. This has never happened to have the whole North and the whole Southwest disbanded completely. So this is, of course, a matter of government credibility and performance. I'm coming back to this moments later, speaking about what Israel perhaps should think of doing. But now I also want to affirm that this event is a great victory for Hamas. It is a great victory for the Arab world, a great victory for Islam, and a great defeat for Israel, a great defeat for the Jewish people, regardless of the fact that we are performing very well on the battleground, in fact, better than many of us would have thought. Efficiency, courage, bravery, and success, the results are quite amazing. And so I'm not talking of the operational, but I'm talking of the broader impact of this event. The events of October 7 have pushed back Israel perhaps 75 years back. I mean, much has been destroyed in a way which is irreversible. And material and moral and attitudinal and identificational, and we shall see the consequences for years now. By the way, I remember after the Yom Kippur War, there was at least 10 to even 15 years of a problematic economy, problematic psychology, problematic immigration, until came something which was at the time not really expected, and that was the big impact of the immigration from the Soviet Union. And that was really the change. In between, there were the Oslo Accords, and there was a moment of optimism. But I mean, the immediate after-war impact was dramatically negative. And so we can expect 7 lean years for Israel. And again, this is a great success of our enemies. It's not to be under-evaluated. So let's put apart the bravery and the success of the military. Israel has been blown back, and there are people who are very happy about that. And now I wish to shortly address 3 things. One is the world at large, 2, Israel, and 3, the Israel diaspora relations. In terms of the world at large, I think what we have seen mostly, I mean, it's very disappointing. Of course, I look at things from Israel, and I'm involved. But I think it goes beyond. It goes beyond imagination. Start with the Red Cross. The International Red Cross should be disbanded and abolished. It's a shame to see the Red Cross, how they behave, how incompetent, how impotent they are. And so it is just one example of something you would think it's neutral, it's nice, it's positive, they do good things. It's not acceptable. Not having been able to see one of the prisoners after 6 weeks or more, that's not acceptable. The UN, not acceptable. What is more subtle is what some of the media have been doing, including some of the leading media. We have seen BBC, New York Times accepting uncritically fake news from the other side and discussing with great caution the Israeli news, always saying, according to what the Israeli says, this and this happened. Never question the statistics about the dead by the Hamas Minister of Health. The invention of the 500 killed in the Gaza Baptist Hospital, which probably are included in the statistics of the dead and the wounded, and never been amended. This is one example. BBC and New York Times, it took them at least 1 week to acknowledge perhaps it was not that true. So this is the end of this kind of pundits, the end of respect. It is a chasm of diffidence and shame. Academy, what happens with the administration of places like Harvard and others? I say, frankly, Harvard to me now is a stationary, no more than that. It doesn't have the right to be accounted as a serious school when such provosts and rectors and presidents accept to be involved in such shameful operations. Also some schools in Canada. By the way, in parentheses, the Butlers and the Chomskys, they are delegitimate Israel, but what they do is to delegitimate the United States of America, because if Israel is doing something illegal, America has been doing something totally illegal for centuries. And so America, the US, should be disbanded by that logic. And those pundits are creating new generations of students, of scholars. They took already the hegemony in those universities. And of course, here it is an endless debate, but sorry, it is really grotesque, but it is very dangerous. I think my personal view is that this is pointing to a very serious decline in American academy and eventually in America. Let's reconvene 25 or 50 years from now, and we will see what happens. But I think it's shameful. The American politics, on the one hand, you have a fascist like Trump, who is a respectable candidate, and you have pro-terrorist candidates on the Democratic side, and good, amazingly good Joe Biden, old and aging. I'm sorry to say that Joe Biden is 2 months younger than me. But I'm sorry to say he shows up on TV as a very tired guy. I love him, and I would hope for his good health and probably victory in the next elections. He does good things. He looks very, very tired and aging. Well, this, though, is the American political system. And then I'm going to speak of the Israeli political system, but this is really amazing what has emerged. And the Catholic Church, the uncertain and middle-of-the-road position of the Pope and some of the leading cardinals. There is on the one hand, on the other hand, please stop violence and every life is worth of living. Let's address what happened on October 7 and let's go into the details. And then let's express your point of view if we should pardon, as some say, or do nothing, as some others have said. So it is a total collapse, sorry to say, total collapse of morality and dignity in what we have, including me, believed in something that was leading. I am myself partly the product of course, the Israeli Academy and even the Italian Academy, but very much I am in debt to the American Academy. I owe very much to the US in terms of my own personality and career. And what has happened is really a collapse of much beliefs that I had. Now, let me turn a moment to Israel. Israel really has reached a point where it has to be totally restarted. We now need Israel 2.0, because what was at happen is the total collapse. The policy has collapsed. The government has collapsed. The system based on the lack of a constitution has collapsed. We need now a new covenant. The new covenant has to be based on the Declaration of Independence. The stupid law of the nation has to be abolished. And of course, a service for everybody according to each owns ability and possibilities and availability, but something that does not exist. Equal obligations to all, and the right to be served for all. The premises of having 4 different educational streams is a failure. We cannot go ahead with this. Of course, to do this, we need, first of all, to reform the electoral system. We have a grotesque electoral system, which produces people who have never been elected. We have a sort of beauty contest in which Mr. A receives 40 mandates and Mr. B receives 12. But we never know who is number 4 or number 26 in the list. We never have control. Nobody is elected in elections. It is a system which has collapsed. It is total failure. And we see how the legislation functions and what kind of governments we have. Of course, by the way, Ephraim, Ruby Rivlin typology was nice, but it's no more the Zionist religious versus the secular, because there are divisions within each. The real division is those who love Israel as a constitutional country and those who don't think Israel should be a constitutional country. And this was really the real cleavage during the last months. So I'm sorry, I think I probably have to conclude, and I will say that unless we do this and we recreate the basis for a viable state of Israel, is very unlikely that Israel can hold in the long run. The last thing is to go back to Israel diaspora relations, and we have to see, first of all, what happens in Israel, because without Israel, a viable Israel, a reformed Israel, to speak of Israel diaspora will be very formal and very difficult, but very scant. What we have seen is that there are divisions. There are people who are totally away from the old concept of Jewish peoplehood. There are totally opposed positions. I think a majority stands with Israel, and we are very proud and very grateful. There is a minority who stands against. I have a colleague of mine who is a statistician. He would say, those who are against Israel, you should not count them in your statistics of the Jews. I cannot do that. I see Ira Sheskin in front of me. I think he would not publish that, but there is something true. The question of what's the meaning of peoplehood when you have such different antithetical positions, and the hatred that emanates from some of these is very problematic. And so we have to take into account that. To conclude, I will quote the American Declaration of Independence, which is founded on 3 principles: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, I don't think they can take for us. We shall fight and we shall win. Liberty, neither. We are free people, and I hope freedom will prevail. Unfortunately, the pursuit of happiness, I think, has been dramatically killed these days, and I hope it comes back sooner or later. Better soon. And final word, these very moments, the Israeli government is deliberating whether to accept the exchange of hostages and prisoners. I'm personally very divided within my heart, but of course, whatever the government will deem is good for this country, we will democratically accept. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sergio. I do think, where is Harriet and Adina, they were thinking about a special issue about crisis, right? So we are experiencing the extension of the concept of crisis, right? When inside, even I was thinking that this excellent volume by Roskis, The Literature of Destruction, brings us, when we see the South, what destruction could mean. Thank you very much. Now, Samuel Heilman, where are you? I want to see you. Okay. Sam, thank you very much. Please, you have been writing and analyzing and expressing very sharp ideas. I think that now the floor is yours. And well, the screen. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I must admit, I was under the impression when I first heard about this roundtable that it would be an opportunity for more than just the speakers to speak. So I'd be very happy at some point if we can have a little kind of give and take between all the people who are participating and the speakers. That's number one. Number two, I just want to make clear that although I'm Emeritus from the City University of New York, I'm an Israeli. I've been living here since I became Emeritus. It's almost 4 years now. And I'm going to talk as briefly as I can about what I have learned so far from this war. And I want to reiterate two things that Sergio said. First, that it isn't just as analysts or sociologists or observers that those of us here in Israel are looking at this war. We have a stake in this war. I have a son who's at the front. We have friends who have suffered many losses. And it's very hard to focus. It's very hard to think about other things at the same time. And although I certainly, as an Israeli, sympathize with my American brothers and sisters who felt the sting of, on the one hand, anti-Semitism, and on the other hand, often the guilt of being there when we are here, closer to where the problem is. Let me start by saying the first thing that I've learned from this war is that the problems with this Netanyahu-led coalition government that many of the protesters were bothered about in the many months that preceded the war contributed to the conditions that led to it. In effect, the people who were spending their time on an agenda that was focused on the prime minister's own political survival before the war, we still have those same people in power, including the prime minister, who continues to remain just as focused on his political survival, and it has affected his ability and many of the people in the government that are dependent upon his coalition to take responsibilities for his actions and concentrate on the good of the country. And the country isn't fooled by this. We hear it on the news, we hear it on the street, and we find it in the polls. The Dialogue Center, for example, in Modi'in found that out of 620 Israeli Jews polled, 86% felt that the surprise attack from Gaza was the fault of Israel's government. 79% of the coalition supporters agreed with that, which is a damning assessment of Netanyahu's leadership. November 3rd poll, most recently, found that 76% of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign. Only about 56% are willing to wait till the end of the war. Many others feel that the people who brought us to this are not the people to take us out. I think Sergio said you wouldn't hire the captain of the Titanic if he had survived to take another great ship across the sea. Part of that, of course, was the focus on an agenda that was irrelevant to the needs of the nation. The appointment of ministers with no experience and with their own agendas to the cabinet, and particularly in sensitive areas like internal defense, housing, internal security. The deputy prime minister, Yariv Levin, the vice prime minister, convicted criminal Derry, the development of Negev and the Galil and national resilience, a right-wing minister from the Otzma party Yitzchak Wasserlauf, the housing minister. This is a very important role, particularly when we see so many of the people who have been really evacuated from their houses, or their houses have been destroyed. That minister, Yitzchak Goldknopf from the United Torah Judaism Haredi party, he's holding on to that money for his own Haredi party. The agriculture minister, who was a former head of the Shin Bet, the agriculture minister, the agriculture is in a disaster. One of the things that many people didn't realize, including myself, was that most of the agriculture that this country depends on was in the area of the South. And with the foreign workers, who among some of whom were, of course, hostages and others victims, the rest left, and our agriculture is dying on the vine. Our eggs need to be that's in the north. Our eggs, the major supplier for eggs, has nobody there to help take the eggs out of the coops. The agriculture department is not doing anything. Our finance and defense minister, Smotrich, from the Zionist party, is not willing to take any of the money that he has collected for the parties and use it for the help of the country. Our education minister, Kish, a former pilot, what does he know about education? Education is in a disaster after going through all the period of time. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. And our national missions, I don't even know what that ministry is for. It costs a lot of money. But the minister of this, Orit Struk, her national mission is, she suggested that we continue or return colonies into Gaza once this war is over. We have 27 ministries, all of whom have cars and drivers and offices, and we have 32 ministers beyond just the 27 ministries that we have. Most of these have not really been functioning and leading during the war, and few have taken responsibility for their unpreparedness, but they continue to be in the government. And as a result, there's an enormous outpouring of efforts by NGOs, by many ad hoc citizen groups, doing all kinds of things that the government should be doing, helping in harvesting some of the agriculture, helping in finding housing for the people. We have an enormous amount of internal refugees who can't just stay in the hotels. There's not enough money to keep them in hotels. They need apartments. I and my wife, for example, were involved in a group that was helping to find and provide for the needs of people who had come to Jerusalem, where we live, who are in borrowed apartments. There's a widely held feeling here that we can't depend on the government for assistance or for handling the basic tasks of governing. Although the IDF is operating well, there's no consensus about the end game, or what people here call the day after. Nobody has an answer for that. Yes, they say we want to destroy Hamas, but what does that mean? How do we know when Hamas is destroyed? How have we defined that? Even today, people were saying, a number of pundits, some of them former members of the government, were saying, well, you can't really distinguish between citizens and Hamas. And that's why we can't be humanitarian about the citizens. Well, who then is going to rule Gaza? Who are we going to give the keys to? There's been talk about giving it to the Palestinian Authority, but the Palestinian Authority, as it now is not necessarily a better steward of these territories. And as members of the government have already said, are we going to give the keys to the people who are running the West Bank to also run Gaza? I'm sorry, yes, to also run Gaza? And the answer is we don't trust them. So there has to be some kind of process of reconstructing a new Palestinian Authority and then negotiate a two-state solution. Or do we not trust anyone and want to hold on to it for ourselves? So there's no agreement, I think, here. That's what I've discovered about the goals of the war. Destroying Hamas, no one knows what that means, and therefore how will we know when it is achieved? There's a second goal that we'll be talking about probably more after this evening, about how we redeem the captives and freeing the hostages. It's extraordinary how much the support for the hostages has come throughout the country, but we don't see that same kind of support coming from the government. It took a long time for the prime minister to even speak to the families of the hostages, and perhaps some of that was because the hostages did not come from a part of the country where he had voters and supporters. The economic woes are another part of what we're seeing in this experience of the government, with both Smotrich and Goldknopf, as I've said, holding on to the money for their personal interests after the war, for the agricultural needs that are immediate. Our education, I mentioned before, the educational woes, after the disruptions of COVID and the disruptions of the war have had an extraordinary impact on education. And now many teachers really, they can't be teaching. Some, of course, have been drafted in the war effort. The schools are closed because people in the north and south are evacuated. The schools are often closed because there's danger of rocket attacks, and there aren't enough shelters for the full class. So some places classes are going part of the class for 2 days and another part of the class for the other 2 days. That's not true in all the cities. Here in Jerusalem, for example, where we've had very few of those attacks, schools are back at what they were, but the funding for education has been diverted to political and defense needs. Higher education is basically on hold. They keep deferring the university opening. Now I heard the most recent date is December 24th, but it's not clear. And the colleges, the Michlalot, who really are have to live off their tuitions, they're in danger of going bankrupt if they remain closed. And finally, the things that everyone said, which is we have feelings of vulnerability. The echoes of the Holocaust, I've never heard them so loud, and I say that as a child of survivors. You didn't hear about it so much in this country, but now people are suddenly feeling a kind of kinship with survivors of the Holocaust, and a sense of a loneliness, and the fact that we're being attacked by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Syrian, Iraqi militias, the Houthis. We didn't even know about the Houthis, and Iran. The fear of unraveling of alliances with Middle East neighbors. Just tonight, Jordan announced that it feels that if there isn't a ceasefire, that they are only 50 miles away from Gaza, and they cannot remain at peace with us under these conditions. So I think we have a fear, of course, of losing American support. We see that the young people are much more likely to be pro-Palestinian, including young Jews, than the older people who remember 1948 and remember when Israel was vulnerable. We've lost many of the PR battles, and we have an extremist government that whenever it finds an opportunity to do something that will undermine support for Israel, does it as it has most recently. And we are still, I think, to some extent, suffering the legacy of Netanyahu's embrace of the political right and Trump Republicans in the past. So there is a consensus that Netanyahu must go as soon as possible, but no clear way to force him, since the current governing coalition believes their political power is tied to his remaining. That means, really, in effect, that Netanyahu and his coalition have an incentive to extend the war. Netanyahu for his own sake, the Zionist extremists for the sake of holding on to the occupied lands. We are in a really difficult position where Israelis feel vulnerable, have lost confidence in their government and in their leadership, and no one seems to have any idea about what to do on the day after.
Wow, Sam. Well, thank you very much. I think that no doubt, following your previous intervention written, you are bringing an analysis that, well, personally, I would say I truly share. It brings critical questions regarding civil society, government, and the state. How do we inhabit the public sphere? And let me just to go on, clarify that we'll continue. We do have a second roundtable, but then we'll continue with this possibility of exchanging our analysis and opinions. You were talking about how do we build trust, which is one of the central questions when we think the day after, right? So I think that now Harriet can bring us her intellectual and existential experience of working with Israelis, Jews, and Arabs and Palestine, and knowing what are the challenges of a multicultural world in Jerusalem, and thinking together how the war will impact these assumptions of values of teaching new generations. Well, Harriet, having said so, please.
Okay, I'm going to bring it down to a personal level. I mean, some of you have, but I want to talk to you about my experience teaching here in Israel, how it contrasts to what it was for me before, and the challenges that I'm facing in the classroom, which should start December 24th, if it starts, but it will start on Zoom, reminiscent of COVID, and I'm not quite sure how to handle it. And so I'm going to share with you some of my fears and challenges and hopes. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I got my doctorate here in Israel and started teaching in Israel for about 20 years. Then I went to the States, and then I came back about 4 years ago, like Sam. And I've been teaching a course at Hadassah Academic College in gender and society. And I've had, this will be my 3rd year there. And the first year was awful. The second year, I found my voice and I found my contribution to democracy in Israel. And now I don't know what to do. So I'll share that with you. I will tell you that I had the opportunity to be teaching a sociology of religion seminar in the States when we had 9/11. And at the time, I thought, now they're going to get it. I was still, I was an Israeli. I was there. And I thought, okay, now they're going to understand. But Americans didn't understand. My students didn't understand. And I was disappointed and went on. Here, I don't know what we are to understand. And I'll talk to you about it. My first, the college enrolls all sorts of Jews, Haredim, religious nationalists, secular, Masoretim, conservatives, progressives, Arab Israelis, and Palestinians from East Jerusalem, where they don't have citizenship, most of them, and really feel lack of identity. And I managed to make my classroom last year be able to talk to each other, be able to voice their concerns, be able to find common ground and common. I mean, I had a group of Palestinians and Jews who wanted to do their project on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And they started it with, we agree on one thing: there won't be peace for 1,000 years. And that's how they started. So they found common ground, but they were able to talk to each other. They were able to yell at each other. They were able to learn from each other. And in the end, they said, we haven't had this kind of experience, which I think is not true. But they said that they were able to talk. It was a safe atmosphere, and they were able to really talk to each other and learn from it. I used a kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion mindset to create a safe place in the classroom, which usually gives a safe place to certain kinds of people, but not necessarily others. But I think in my classroom, everybody felt that. Now, I don't know what to do, because now there are people who have hostages taken. There are people who have lost people. There are people who are supporting the opposition to Israel. There are people who are for Israel. And there are triggers among all of them for each other. So I heard that there are students who can't stand to hear Arabic talked by Arab students. There are students who don't want their teachers to talk Arabic to the students. It's just a trigger for them. And they feel it's going to be very hard to create a safe atmosphere in the classroom. I can't imagine teaching gender just focusing on the subject matter. Gender touches our very identities. You have to be able to share your own viewpoints, your own experiences. You can't just focus on the subject matter, which some people feel they can. I never thought that I could create a classroom that would be ivory tower, a safe place, by disconnecting from what happens in the real world. I never wanted to do that, and I don't believe that you can teach gender that way. But what if someone triggers anxiety in someone else? How am I going to feel? How am I going to handle that? Well, I taught during COVID, and at that time, students started to be really anxious, and we had to deal with a lot of anxiety. But this is a little different. It's a little different for a number of reasons. One is that I don't feel that I have the cultural capital as an Israeli to understand everything that's going on. I haven't been here in the last 25 years. I've been here the last 4 years. Part of it I spent in the States because of COVID. I don't feel like I understand the terms used. I don't think I understand the triggers that people may have. And my way of handling that has always been turn to the students, let them help run the classroom. But now students have agendas, and I don't know whether I can trust them. I don't know whether I can trust their viewpoints. I don't know what news they're getting. There's so much fake news. We talk about it, but they are listening to different things. There was in my department meeting today, we had an example. Someone brought an example of at Hebrew University, some lecturer not letting a woman in army uniform come into her class. It happens to be not true. But that faculty member started to talk about it. And my other faculty member said, that's not true. And he wouldn't let him finish his sentence. You know, like interrupting is the wrong thing to do in a classroom. And he afterwards wrote to me and he said, I couldn't be sure that people would stick around to hear the truth. In a Zoom meeting, you can leave. If you don't agree with something, and this is true in a classroom too, you can leave. He said, I had to interrupt. I had to set the record straight. Well, that's just one kind of challenge I'm going to have. Someone will say something, and another will say that's not true. And they're both sure, and they're both right in terms of listening to the news and the picture that they have. How am I going to handle that? Well, I'm going to set up rules at the beginning, and I'm going to talk about what they do if they're really triggered by something and how to handle it. I don't know if it's going to work because people are really invested in proving their points. And the cooperation that we had of all of Israeli society in the college is really at risk. We also have had a minister who has said he wants to stop the education of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. That is leading to Bagrut, is leading to getting integrated into the Israeli system. They're really vulnerable. They really don't know where they stand in Israeli society. We have Arabs who are working in hospitals, in pharmacies, in the army, who have faced a lot of prejudice. And I don't know how you establish trust among people who have had such different experiences. I'll say also that I'm teaching this class as an English class. There's a rule now that all students in the college have to take 2 English classes in their majors. So my class is given in English. That actually made it easier for me. I don't talk English all the time. They don't understand me. When it gets to really important things, I want to make sure they understand. But that gives me an out. I don't have to talk Hebrew and I don't have to talk Arabic. I can be an outsider, and that's a good thing for me in this situation. And I can ask them to tell me what's going on because I present as an American. My Hebrew is very heavily accented, and I grapple for words, and it's good actually in this situation. But it's problematic in general for the classroom atmosphere. Last year, occasionally the class got out of control. I mean, they would just take it away, and I would wind up raising my hand because I wanted them to stop and listen to me. Well, I can't do that now because it can go to a place that's dangerous. It can go to a place where people really don't feel safe. So I'm challenged. I'm still going to approach my class in the same way, where together we have rules of conduct, where we talk civilly, where I'm going to assume that they want to learn the subject matter and that they want to get along. But I have to always have my antenna up that this may not be true. And I have to worry about that. And if and when we ever get back in the classroom, there's more of a feeling of danger. At least on Zoom, the worst that can happen is it explodes and we stop learning. In the classroom, I don't know how that will work. And we've had department meetings where people have very different points of view, and I came to the conclusion that we each have to do it in a way that's comfortable for us. So here, the personal is the political. We all have agendas. We all have belief in a certain kind of society, and it's going to come out in the classrooms. But I don't know how we're going to do this with 10-week classes. I mean, one of the things of starting the class year, December 24th, is that we're going to have 2 semesters that are 10 weeks each. Is that going to be enough to cover the material? Well, I was here when there was a strike of faculty and students. We missed 3 months of a semester and got to an agreement with the students that they were not responsible for anything that they lost, that they didn't hear. How did they learn anything about sociology of education in the month that we actually taught a class? I'm going to have to give up on that. I'm going to have to hope that they understand, looking through a gender lens at what is happening, at what goes on in the real society. And that's all I can hope for. I can't hope that they're going to learn the material that I really wanted them to learn. And that's distressing, but a reality. Some people said, well, some of the people in my department said, we're just going to quiet down the discussion. If it goes in a place where it's dangerous, we're going to stop that discussion and say, we're not covering that in this classroom. If you want to talk to me about it, come afterwards. But that's a way for people to feel that their opinions are not legitimate in the classroom and as a microcosm of Israeli society, not legitimate in the society. And I think that that's what's happening in Israeli society. We're not together, not the whole society. And I think I don't know how the colleges are going to continue with trying to bring us all together for the purposes of learning. And I'm not sure what's going to happen after that. There's also been talk about whether we should actually bring in what's happening in the wider society. And I decided that I'm going to have my students bring in current events, that they're going to rotate among themselves to bring in something that's happened in the last week. And I'll put a gender lens on it. I don't know how that's going to work, because some of the things they're going to bring in are things that will really incense someone else. And truthfully, this is happening in the States too, where people are getting different sources of knowledge, different sources of viewpoints, and they're all legitimate or all illegitimate, however you look at it. And it is really representative of our society as a global society, and particularly in Israel. And it really will change what Israeli society has been up to now, which functioned b'diavad. It was functioning practically, but not ideologically. And now that's come to a crisis. And we really will have to recreate Israeli society and the microcosm of it in the colleges and in the universities. Somebody suggested that we have to do really careful planning. We have to make sure that we're using good assignments, active learning, that we are sure are safe. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. I don't want to give up the opportunity to help recreate Israeli society in my classroom, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to have to just deal with it on the ground. And I think I'm beginning to have the confidence that I can do that. But I think all of us who are teaching multiple types of students are going to have this challenge in our classrooms and in the society. And I'll stop with that.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet. I think that the session and your participation now brought us to understand that there are mediation in between the micro, the meso, the macro that should be taken into account just to see their specificity, but also the way they are interrelated. Before we open, because we have still some, I would say 20 minutes or more if we can stay, I want to add that we were talking about trust, right? And all the other values, morality, dignity. And now we are talking about empathy. And I think that this is a central element, the way we can understand the other, not only explain him, but understanding. And that's really very, very difficult, specifically when we also doubt about the capacity of our, let's say, cognitive dimension, our theories, etc., to build bridges. They are also today quite polarized. So having said so, please, I would like to open the screen to this magnificent, I would say really sad, but appealing, moving, intellectually, existentially moving. I agree with what you have said. Living in Israel, living outside Israel makes a difference, makes a great difference. To this, I wanted to refer when I said that the weight and the cost is different, of course. And well, I assume that next week when we'll focus on the communities, we'll start to see how we can build these bridges of empathy to understand what's going on and how to face it. There is someone that would like to ask, to reflect, to say, to question, whatever. Yes, please, Morton.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thanks for these wonderful, wonderful presentations. I want to just focus on one slice that was touched on a little bit by Sergio in terms of the degradation that may be going on in the universities in the West. I know that some of the people here, I think maybe a few of us have been teaching in universities in the West that are not affiliated with Jewish organizations or Jewish institutions. So we confront this phenomenon directly. I know Ira has this at University of Miami. I've been teaching at McGill since 1977. And in 1977, I began to teach a course on the sociology of Jews in North America. And I've been teaching it ever since. And I'll just make a few points because, you know, I want to pose a question to the group, but then I want to just finish telling some of my stories the way Harriet was telling some of her experiences. The question I want to pose to the group has to do with anti-Semitism and the eruptions of anti-Semitism that we're seeing, for example, on campus and whatnot. And the question I want to ask, I don't have an answer, is, are these eruptions of anti-Semitism brand new phenomena representing an inflection point, something new? Or has this kind of anti-Semitism really been there all the time? It's been dormant, it's been latent for whatever reason, and now it's been triggered, and here we have it. I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe when I finish, you guys can help me. Now, getting back to the experience at McGill. So I have been teaching about 100 students a year in my course at McGill. I'm happy to say that the majority of those students are not Jewish. Once upon a time, they were Jewish. Now they are not Jewish. which is fine. And I just want to share a couple of insights very quickly. The non-Jewish students, by the way, the non-Jewish students include at least, I'd say, half of them are racialized minorities. I have Arab students, I have Black students, lots of Chinese and Asian students, and there they are in this class. And they're wonderful students, and they're great students. I'm not exactly certain why they're taking the course, but doesn't matter. Here they are. So I would say that a lot of those non-Jewish students have no idea of why there are Jews in Israel today. They do not know the history and the linkage. Most of them do not go to a Sunday school at all. They don't know the Christian Bible, and they don't know the Jewish Bible. So they see that there's these Jews running around Israel. How did they get there? What are they doing there? What's their connection? A lot of them don't know. And I very, very gently will pass on that information in my class. That is something that I can do on campus now. I'll be retiring from McGill at the end of next year, but I think that is something that one can do. One can try to educate. Now, I haven't taught this course for 2 years, and Harriet may be right. It may be that when I enter the classroom now, after this very tense period, things will have changed. Because up to now, I basically did not have problems confronting difficult issues in the class. The technique I would use is the following. I would say, well, on the question of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, there are some scholars and people who say X, and there are other scholars and people who say Y. And I would not make a big fuss or a big deal about expressing my own view on that. You could say it was a cop-out, although, you know, there were some smart students who could figure out where I stood on this issue. Hamevin Yavin. But, you know, it was not my job to perpetuate my own views, but I confronted it and I had no trouble. It may be that next year, when I teach this course for the last time, it will be difficult. I do not know. The other thing that I've been doing, and I don't know to what extent we can do it, I'll wrap up right now, is that we should try wherever possible to give lectures on Jewish topics at our various universities, not to hide in the closet, but to try to be out there. So this past year, I've been a visitor at U of T. I gave 3 public lectures on Canadian Jewish life at the University of Toronto. I was told there were some plainclothes guards in the building. I gave the talks. I think they went well. So I'm just saying, in terms of what I can do as a professor in the classroom in North America, those are the kinds of things that present themselves to me. And, you know, part of it was sparked by what Sergio was saying and what Harriet was saying. And this is what I can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Harriet and Danny, right? Harriet, you want to directly refer to Morton's, please? And Danny,
I want to tell you that Judit and I had an exchange right after October 7th. And Judit said, the world changed in one day. And I said, no, it didn't. It just, we were closing our eyes to it, but it was there all the time. And now we see it. So my answer to you is that it's been around for a very long time. And it's like a little bit like a divorce. When you reframe it and then you see it in that, oh, this marriage wasn't so great after all. And you reframe everything that's happened in it. And I think we can do this too, to understand it better, but it's not a new thing. It's just more blatant, more legitimized to talk about it. And in the States and in North America, I think we have Trump to thank for that we can say whatever we want, we can do whatever we want, and it's legitimized. But it's not just, he's a symbol. He's not the one that changed it. He just took the Band-Aid off sometimes.
You know, Harriet, before, please, sometimes I have problems with this, what is manifest and what is latent. But I think that regarding your question, Morton, it has to do with context, with times, and with differences. 1975, Zionism equates racism, where we know what happened at the universities, right? And it differed. It was not so global. The North and the South differed. So I think that today, referring to what you mentioned, Jews have been whitened. They are not racialized minority, and the attack and the question of the West includes Jews. So this is, I would say, a sort of a new constellation that will allow us to discover previous representation and prejudices and new elaborations. But I don't know. I don't know. I would say Ecclesiastes, not Kohelet, because it might be misinterpreted now with Kohelet. But yeah, things change, of course, and there is continuity and there is ruptures, right? This is what I mean. But I have two hands that were raised, right? Danny and Sergio. Please, Danny. Hi, Danny.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. And yeah, I agree with Harriet. So what we observe now is actually not new. It has been there. And it might have been hidden under the surface in some areas of research. However, I'm a trained anthropologist, and I actually attended the last AAA conference in 2015, where an anti-Israeli boycott was pitched to the whole membership. And it was incredibly depressing, and as well what kind of aggressions came out towards Jews and towards Israelis. And this is an issue which was brought up as well. I mean, in general, there's a lack of knowledge about Israeli, Palestinian, and Middle Eastern history. And in particular, in regard to the case study that I have been working on, which is Germany, there's a complete and utter lack of knowledge about living Jews, about living Israelis. And there's a huge difference between the discourses of Jewish and non-Jewish researchers, which I could establish. And what came out after October 7th is that communication with German non-Jewish colleagues has become incredibly difficult, because the moment they ask me how I feel, and if I say, actually, I feel miserable, I become an vengeful Jew and an Israeli culprit, so that actually whole German citizenship is completely blanked out. And it's very, very scary, because our colleagues in Germany have been offered to teach in home office or to actually get security in front of their doors while teaching. And this is actually a new quality. However, and that is a point that Sergio made concerning the destruction of Hamas, having been born and raised in Germany and having grown up with survivors, and as well with German non-Jews married to Jews already during the Shoah, you can probably military destroy Hamas, like the Nazis could be military defeated. However, the ideology lives on. And we can see that very clearly in voting patterns right now, because the German electorate is swinging to the right. And I mean, the idea that people learn from history is something which doesn't even make me laugh bitterly anymore, because it's clearly not happening. So what we see in regard of what is coming out has been there, and it's very long-standing cultural repertoires which are being revived. And if I'm really honest, I have no idea what to do about it anymore, because I thought education analysis and empirical data sets would help. But looking at what I find now in terms of data, I just find it utterly depressing. And as well, the the issue of Jews not being heard is actually quite shocking, or being framed immediately as an Israeli aggressor, because that's typically what I get. It's like, yeah, but you're an Israeli and you actually want to destroy the Palestinians and you're suppressing the Palestinians. So there's no actual appreciation of the trauma, of the terror, and as well of the terror and the crime that comes out. So it's well, I'm not quite sure, but these are the observations I can share with you, and they're very long-standing.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. Sergio, and then Sam, and then Debbie also, right? So
thank you. Well, to Mort, I would, and also relating to Harriet and Judit and Danny. My answer is striking. The feature is a continuation of what, latent, the current evident feature is the continuation and expression of the latent situation which always exists. I, as you know, rely on empirical data more than on my own brain. And I've done this week, there was a new survey published in a certain place in Europe, which measured the variation of anti-Semitism. And so I did a quick run of those data. And the results that I got through a certain method, which tries not so much to focus on the percentages, but on the structure of the phenomenology. The method is called similarity structure analysis. This is technical, but the point is that you get a result which explains to you what's the logical structure of the phenomenon you are studying, and it can be any phenomenon. Well, the structure is identical to what we had in all of the previous studies of anti-Semitism done during the last years on a much more serious basis. That is, there is no change, and the structure, just to summarize it in 3 words, because the phenomenon is very simple. It is a grotesque phenomenon, but it is very simple. It has 3 components. One, hatred, diminution, delegitimation of the Jew. 2, delegitimation, minimization, denial of the Shoah. And 3, delegitimation, negation of the State of Israel. These 3 components, of course, Israel did not exist until 1948. Now this is an enrichment. We have a new component, but these 3 components appear neatly, cleanly, when you have the right technical tools to study them, exactly in the same position and in the same configuration. I mean, it is very clear. Not only that, there is a division of labor on the ground between the right tends to attack the Jews, and the left tends to attack Israel. By the way, at one of the elections, it's fun. I happen to be an Israeli, but I have kept my Italian citizenship just for the sake of it, and to enter Italy through a shorter line at the frontier. And there are elections in Italy where the Italian citizens abroad can vote. And so I vote, and I have children. The children has inherited my Italian passport. And so the last elections, my daughter comes to me and asks me, Dad, should I vote, in your opinion, for those who hate the Jews or those who hate Israel? These were the questions. I will not tell you what the answer was. But there are long-term phenomena which do not change. However, of course, there are triggering factors. And so the perceived intensity of the phenomenon is variable. So every time there is trouble in Gaza, the number of anti-Semitic events increases. But then if you look at the data about the perceptions and about what Judit said, the latent, you find that it is there, and the components are the same, and the division of labor is there. And so in a more or less acute way, and in fact, nothing has changed, although there is one further point, and then I will make a further one. The further point is that when the crisis becomes very critical, in the world, there is a lot of fear about the globalization of conflict. Go back 50 years ago in 1973, all of the supermarkets in Europe were empty because the Europeans thought that because of the energy crisis triggered by the Kipur War, there would be war in Europe and they would remain without milk and eggs and bread. And so they emptied the supermarkets. Now, of course, nobody wants to globalize the conflict. Now, the conflict so far has not globalized too much. We look at how Israel is somewhat restraining its replies to Lebanon, but we have Yemen, which is a new factor, and behind that there is Iran. We have two aircraft carriers from the United States in the port of Haifa. I mean, these are things that we have not seen before. And so in theory, this might become a regional conflict and finally World War III. It could be. I mean, if I have to bet, today I will not bet on World War III, but the probability is not zero. And so everybody is frightened, and this affects very much their reactions to that. And so we, the Jews, perceive anti-Semitism according to these mental fluctuations, which are not negligible. The final thing, again, picking up on Mort, I think he said a very important thing, and that's the role of the academic in public life. I think, contrary to what was my stance for many years, I think now we have to militate. The ivory tower, Zichronah Livracha, was dead. And so we have to be present in the arena. We know a few things, some of us know different things, and we, I think, should be committed to participate in public life and not only to remain in our rooms and write another paper. This is a significant change, which we have to consider very seriously.
Thank you, Sergio. I have two requested, Sam and Debbie, please.
So I will be very brief. The hour is late for us here in Israel. I always thought, and as most of my life, I lived in America and I continue to be an American citizen. But it always struck me that for Jews in America who felt, well, Israel is not really of interest to me. You know, we've talked about, we had in our journal a whole series of papers on the distancing hypothesis, and that younger Jews really thought Israel is, I don't know much about it, I'm not really interested in it. But I think what we've discovered with this war is what I have always believed, which is when Israel bleeds, we all are wounded wherever we are, and you cannot hide from being a Jew just because you don't support Israel. Whatever, I mean, we discovered that here too. Many of the victims in the South were members of the peace camp. One of the most prominent, Vivian Silver, was really a remarkable person whose attachments to Palestinian-Israeli dialogue were enormous, but it didn't matter. And I think in the same sense, anti-Semites abroad meaning outside of Israel, they don't care whether you're pro-Israel or anti-Israel or don't know much about Israel and don't care about Israel. When Israel does something that allows or gives license to the world to allow anti-Semitism to raise its head, no Jew anywhere is immune from it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Debbie. Dear Debbie.
Thank you, Sam. As usual, it's
so elegant, so well put. That's what I wanted to say. But I will add something else. It's very hard for me to relate to you and Harriet as Israelis. And I find that very interesting. And it brings out all kinds of other identity issues, which, you know, I've been working on for a few years here. So I wanted to say that two things are very worrisome to me. And they were touched upon lightly, but I think, Judith, maybe you were trying to get to that. And is the complexity of saying it's the right, it's the left, it's the center right, it's the center left. And I have found that in the last 4 weeks in which I feel like I've been sitting Shiva every day, I see that those who I would have automatically assumed were my allies, 2 weeks later, were not my allies, and we're not talking in the same way or asking the same kinds of questions. So I am very worried that I am clearly a feminist. I have always identified more with the left, certainly than the right, but I have definitely been left and left center. And I think that right now, I can say to you that I know many feminists who are astounded by the response of other feminists whom we never believed this would happen. Judith Butler no more represents me as a feminist than Donald Trump represents me politically. That's all. I just want to say we have to be very careful. And I think the notion of for and against, it's too easy. We're much more sophisticated than that in our analyses. We know the complexities of these things. I think that's what we have to pay attention to, the complexities and the mixing and the matching and the context. Anti-Semitism may be latent, but not in the forms that it takes. It takes very different forms depending on the context, so that sometimes your allies are your enemies. So that's where I wanted to put it. And to say the last thing is, Harriet, go for it. You're gonna meet the challenge. There is no doubt in my mind you will meet the challenge. And thank you all. Thank you all. This is a wonderful discussion.
Debbie, thank you very much. You know, I do agree with you. We are now not only talking about types or sources of anti-Semitism, also the changing morphology, right? The way it is constructed, revealed. I'm working on it. I have a pending work to finish, Sinopia and Pentimenti, what we can from the art see as recurrences and changes. Well, let me, of course, congratulate our 4 colleagues and all of you. And there is one reminding news. Next week we'll meet together, but we already prepared another link to another space, which is much alike that the one we are having here. That is, we'll have a space, a virtual space, where we can meet. The link, probably the easy link, you don't have, I think, to register, I'll check. And the frequency and times where we can meet and continue this discussion after our 2 seminars, right? I wish we could have better times, really. Better news. We all, I feel, how did you say, Debbie? The rational, the cognitive comes with the emotional, and our affects are moved, we are touched, and that's what we need. I see, before finishing, dear Perla, I see your hand. I didn't see previously.
Yeah, I would like to thank for this space. I think that it was a kind of catharsis, but an intelligent one, a very good one, listening to the presentations. For next time, or for the space you are opening, I would like to go back to 2 things that were already said. The first, but I want to make clear that when in Ruby Rivlin talked about the 4 tribes. In a special meeting with Jews and Israelis, he said that there is a 5th tribe, and this is the diaspora. So I think that we will need to think together about the role that the diaspora and the Israeli diaspora will have to have in the reconstruction after this crisis, and thinking about the relations about that, it will be very important. And the point that I think that Sergio said, it is really frustrating to feel that this situation could in many aspects be avoided. And all the issue around the place of the leadership is very, very important. Not just the leadership that brought us to this situation after the 10 months of the judicial overhaul, but also the leadership that will be responsible with the social, the civil society to reconstruct from the point that we are living today. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful meeting.
Well, you know, I would like, before Harriet, I see your hand. That's interesting because when you were talking and Mort were talking, I thought what Perla was thinking, because we share the seminar, I am in charge at the doctoral program, and we had the experience of having to deal. And one lesson that I had personally there and in a public meeting at another university is that knowledge has its impact. If we want to really collaborate just to clarify our students, they are very well prepared in their theoretical approaches toward the third, well, I would say toward the global south, but they are not prepared to understand facts, history, trends. So this is our weapon, I would say, knowledge. We should be in the public space, but as intellectuals, knowing, having to contribute and collaborate. Yes, Harriet, before we say goodbye, thank you.
I would like all of you to think about, we have a special issue coming up with Contemporary Jewry on response to and emergence from crisis. We take regular research, but also statements. And there are many of you who have what to contribute, and I want you to keep it in mind. It'll be for, I think it's the 3rd issue of 2024, 3rd or 4th issue, so you have some time, but keep it in mind.
Well, so thank you, all of you. It was so good seeing you. I wonder who is joining the AJS in San Francisco. I keep on asking, I don't have the answer, but I keep on also, I see now hands, I keep on insisting to our colleagues at AJS that the Zoom option of participation should be open. Today I had a new exchange. I understand there are difficulties, but let us see if we can. Moreover, I still don't know what's the precise number of Israelis that are participating, and who already had to cancel or not. But we'll be in touch on this. So thank you very much. How do I do like this, right? Here, that became a custom, right? We embrace each other and we appreciate our 4 colleagues for their wonderful reflections and all of you also. So shalom, shalom, leitraot. Bye-bye. See you next week.